We also have the delight to have our track sponsors, Unity, for this, the Monetizer track. So basically, that's the kind of the key area here. You know all the key players. So let's get a little bit of a word from our sponsor, Unity. So I think we've got a little short video coming up. That's great stuff. So just a little taster of some of the content that's been made in Unity. Enough about me talking. Let's kick straight off. So I think hopefully we've got Emory with us. And I think you're going to talk to us about the keys to success in 2021. So it's always funny for me handing over to somebody speaking from Unity when it used to be me doing all the Unity speaking. Well, not all of it, but quite a lot of it. Emory, over to you. Tell us all about monetization with Unity.
Great, thanks, Oscar. That's actually the first time I've seen that particular Unity sizzle trail, so very cool stuff in there. So, hey everyone, thanks for giving me a small part of your day to go through Unity's 2021 gaming report. I believe it's afternoon over there in the United Kingdom, but it's quite early for us over here in San Francisco, so apologies if I yawn at all. So my team and I dove into a ton of data from 2020, which was a very interesting year, to say the least, and we're excited to share some findings with you. We hope that there are some insights here you can use to succeed in 2021. On the topic of myself and my team, I want to give you a quick introduction so that you'll know that who you'll be spending the next kind of 20-ish minutes with, which reminds me I should probably start my timer to make sure I'm kind of on time. I lead the publisher operations team over here at Unity in San Francisco. Our job is to ensure that all of Unity's game developers or publishers are able to utilize Unity's Operate Solutions products to their full capabilities. Before coming to Unity, I worked on several indie titles that you've probably never heard of, as well as some AAA games that you may have heard of, some things like Call of Duty and The Sims. My team has also had a wide breadth of experience from a variety of game studios and related ad tech companies. We understand gaming, monetization, and most importantly, how the two of them work together. Okay, with introductions out of the way, let's dive into the data. We drew the data for this report from 4 areas of Unity's Operate Solutions business. The first is the Unity engine itself, as well as its ads and analytics platform. Over 300,000 games from over 60,000 different developers are made with Unity, which gave us a really wide overview of the industry. Next, we tapped into the Delta DNA platform. This is actually Unity's premium analytics and engagement platform. It allows developers to really deep dive into their game's live data via things like direct SQL access and custom reporting, while also letting developers put that data to use through player engagement tools like A/B testing, campaigns, or player messaging, such as push notification and emails. Lastly, we tapped into 2 of our other services, Multiplay and Vbox, to get insights into how multiplayer games fared. Multiplay is one of the most resilient multi-cloud server hosting platforms and matchmaking platforms out there, and Vbox is Unity's hosted managed solution for voice and text chat. All 3 of these platforms, Delta DNA, Multiplay, and Vbox, are entirely engine agnostic, so you don't have to be made with Unity to use them, which means that we have data from across the industry. So for the rest of this talk, I'll also be referring to games as either mobile or HD. Mobile is what everyone a Pocket Gamer is likely familiar with, mainly iOS and Android games. HD, which stands for high definition, encompasses PlayStation, Xbox, PC, macOS, and other desktop gaming experiences. So even though Pocket Gamer focuses mostly on mobile gaming, There's been more and more overlap between mobile and HD games, especially as crossplay between the two different platforms picks up in popularity. And crossplay being the ability to play on the phone with someone who's playing on an HD device. So with all the data sources we just talked about, how much data is there? So I'm not going to read through all of the bullets on this slide because there's quite a few numbers, but it's safe to say there are quite a few billions and millions on here. Since we really only have 20 minutes together, I'm going to move along, but if you're watching a recording of this later, feel free to pause here and kind of read through them. And one last bit before we start diving into charts. We ran a developer survey to get an idea of our representation and coverage in the gaming space, specifically around gaming engines and the different ad networks that people use for monetization. You can see here that Unity is definitely one of the most used gaming engines out there. And on the ad network side, we also have a really strong market share. This gives us some degree of confidence in the data we're about to present. So I want to pause here and explain a little bit about how we present our data. The chart on the left shows what raw data might look like. You can see that while it's pretty readable, it doesn't exactly isolate the percentage change when you compare year over year, because the beginning of each year starts at a different number than the previous year. Additionally, some data is too sensitive to share raw numbers for, so we're actually able to share more data with you guys if we normalize the data down to these percentage numbers. The chart on the right shows normalized data. That means that on the first day of each year, we take that as a baseline, which is basically 0%. For every subsequent week of the year, the percentage number will be either above or below this 0% baseline. This means that if a line drops below 0%, it doesn't actually mean that that particular metric decreased. It just means that it's lower relative to the first day of the year. Likewise, if a line from 2020 is above 2019's, like in this example chart on the right, it doesn't mean that 2019 was negative compared to 2020. It just means that 2020 grew faster relative to the baseline. And like all things, when you look at normalized data, you have to realize that the baseline for the subsequent year is actually the end point of the year before. So for example, the baseline for 2020 here is actually the end point of 2019. And we've seen that gaming kind of increases every year. So a lot of the times, these lines are just basically all the way up and to the right. But when you normalize them just to see what the exact percent change is, you might see some dips up and down. All right, so let's get started. We used a week of March 8th to designate when COVID finished impacting the entire globe, as that's the week that many Western countries went into lockdown, many schools kind of made all their kids go home, many workplaces sent all their employees to work from home. During 2020, we saw the population of gamers continue to rise. On mobile, when COVID hit, we saw a massive increase in daily active users as more people sought entertainment during the quarantine. However, as the year went on, this bump kind of leveled out. Once again, this doesn't mean that 2020's DAU decreased relative to 2019, it just means it grew more slowly. Remember, the end point of 2019 is 2020's beginning 0% baseline. For HD games, the COVID bump was noticeable, as you can see on the chart on the right in March, but not nearly as significant. However, as fall approached and people were still locked inside the pandemic, we saw a massive bump in HD game engagement, spurred by both some big game launches and next-gen console launches. Both mobile and HD games showed the same trend during summer months, where daily active users dropped slightly. The warm weather made other outdoor activities still doable despite the pandemic, but as the colder seasons kind of set in, people around the world retreated back indoors and picked their games back up. So what does this mean for 2021? The way that we see it, the increase in HD games means that there's a continued appetite for the kind of gameplay experiences that HD games have. Replicating HD games on mobile devices is a trend we're definitely going to see on the horizon. So let's talk about mobile games, because Pocket Gamer is all about mobile. In 2020, when COVID hit, there was a substantial bump in mobile gaming ad revenue due to just the sheer number of users who are now playing these mobile games. And you can see that over here, right past the line in that second week of March. You see a big bump in ad revenue that kind of levels out a little bit. While ad revenue growth kind of stagnated a bit immediately after May, which is basically when the summer months kind of set in, they picked that up and outperformed last year's growth trend during the summer. So the next chart I'm about to show you also highlights one of the reasons for the strong recovery and performance throughout 2020. So the large volume of mobile gaming ads when COVID hit stressed a lot of the existing advertising demand and caused CPMs to drop below the trend set by 2019's baselines. For those kind of unfamiliar with what eCPM is, it stands for effective cost per mil, and mil is an old way of saying thousand. It essentially means the revenue that you get per 1,000 ads that your users view. So after the dip and plateaued performance throughout the summer that you can see, CPMs actually bounced back up during the fall at an unprecedented rate and concluded 2020 with exceptionally strong performance. We saw that basically advertisers were able to kind of re-trigger all their campaigns and allocate things efficiently towards mobile gaming, which caused a lot of great strong performance throughout the rest and the end of the year. So we also broke down the ad revenue increases last year by App Store category. So you can see here that all the categories are from the iOS and Google Play stores. And all categories also increased our ad revenue growth last year, but one. And that one is unfortunately sports games. Sports games suffered a lot last year due to lower traffic. Sports games tend to gain traffic and users when live sporting events are also occurring. Without the increased interest from the real world equivalents during the lockdown period, sports games had a kind of a lull period immediately from that spring to summertime when all live sports were pretty much canceled or put on furlough. They did pick up towards the end of the year when things started back up, but I definitely missed out on a large chunk of the free time that people did have during the summer compared to 2019. And on the topic of mobile game ads, one thing that developers always come to us worrying about is how they affect user retention. So last year, we did a similar exercise to the one that we're doing this year, comparing the retention of games with ads and the retention of games without ads. We found that in 2020, games without ads suffered a larger dip on the first day retention than games with ads when compared to 2019. So you can see here, day one retention of games with ads drops by about 0.5%, but day one retention of games without ads actually dropped by almost 2%. Additionally, games with ads continue to show stronger retention than their ads list counterparts across both day 7 and day 30 retention, which are those longer term retention numbers that developers are really interested in. And overall, games showed stronger long-term retention in 2020 when compared to 2019, likely since people have a lot fewer entertainment options available to them during lockdown. You can pretty much play games or watch Netflix or movies at home, and there's not too much else to do besides work. And this really just goes to show that if ads are implemented intelligently into a game, they actually can raise long-term user engagement. For 2021, we'd urge all mobile developers who have or are looking at mobile game ads to consider and evaluate how to implement those ads into their titles, as the myth that they negatively impact retention is very much not true. Another interesting insight from 2020 was how gaming habits shifted from the weekend to the weekdays. We counted Monday through Thursday as weekdays and Friday through Saturday, Sunday as weekend days. We then took total gaming traffic for each day and averaged out what percentage of that gaming traffic occurred on weekdays and what percentage occurred on weekends. The top chart shows 2019, while the bottom one shows 2020. As you can see, during the summer months, the weekday and weekend lines narrow as kids get off from school and have more free time during the weekdays. However, 2020's chart on the bottom shows that this narrowing between the two lines happened almost immediately once the pandemic set in across the world. And these two lines continue to be much closer to each other than the previous years, and they even briefly inverse during 1 week in May for some reason. This means that more people were gaming throughout the week instead of just concentrating their gaming on those weekend days, probably because they had more free time or were able to just stay at home and were able to pop open those games either in between meetings or right at the end of the workday without having to worry about their long commutes. Even as schools began to open back up in the fall, the gap between weekdays and weekends was much more narrow than it was in 2019. So in 2021, it's probably worth developing and running live games with this shift in gaming habits in mind. Traditionally, gaming developers will often launch a new event on a Friday to kind of capture that overall weekend bump And we'll be reticent to kind of update that throughout the kind of working day weeks because it's a little bit harder to get that return on your efforts. But as we've seen here, people's habits have shifted a little bit. Another thing that we investigated was if people changed their mobile gaming habits. In particular, we segmented out hyper casual and some casual games into what we call commuter games. These are games with short play sessions that encourage pick up and play gameplay. And frequently, these games are simple to play while you're waiting for the train, the bus, the subway, or even in those small lulls at work in between meetings. We segmented other apps into mid-core and hardcore games. These are games with more involved gameplay like role-playing games or RPGs and strategy games. In some cases, these mobile games even feature similar or identical gameplay to their HD counterparts of the same genre. As you can see, when the pandemic happened, commuter apps really suffered in daily active users. When you compare 2019's extreme growth for commuter apps, which is that dotted yellow line on the chart here, the difference here is very stark. On the other hand, hardcore games saw a huge increase in DAU when the pandemic started. Over the course of 2020, that growth slowed down, but hardcore games still finished 2020 at a stronger growth rate than 2019. Part of this kind of drop-off throughout the year could also be attributed to the significant growth of HD games near the tail end of 2020. Because after all, if everybody's staying home and you can play an HD experience on your mobile device or on your PlayStation or your computer, you'll likely go for the more comfortable form factor, which is a larger screen. But what does this mean for 2021 is that developers should not be afraid of creating more involved gameplay experiences for their mobile games. Even as the world returns to normal, there's likely still going to be some residual appetite for deeper gameplay across both HD and mobile platforms. We also took a look at how mobile game in-app purchases changed in 2020. Overall, the average number of transactions per paying user increased in 2020. With the pandemic forcing many to stay indoors, people's spare entertainment dollars only had so many places to be spent, and one of those key outlets was spending in games. The average amount spent per transaction was varied. For some game categories that we broke down, the average amount actually decreased, but we actually saw that was mainly because a lot of games took advantage of all these new users coming into their games and their increased player base sizes and ran smaller purchase amounts to increase that overall conversion rate. Things like 99-cent starter bundles or like $1.99 new player packs really kind of contributed to this overall decrease in transaction dollar amount per player. But some categories like casino games had the best of both worlds, which a huge increase in average amount per pair and the increased number of transactions per pair. And then for our final few insights, I think I have around 5-ish minutes left if my timer is correct. We want to look at some HD multiplayer games. Even though this is a conference focused on mobile games, there are many mobile games that have taken a leaf from some of the HD games books and with its similar features. A good example of that are game seasons and their associated monetization, things like battle passes or subscriptions. We took a look at multiplayer game season length in weeks and then fitted them to a normalized curve. For these games, the average season length was 11.2 weeks, which is just under 3 months. We've seen multiple mobile games take inspiration from the seasonal model. After all, when you kind of boil it down, seasonal updates are simply a more gamified version of large regular content updates. And we've seen everything from casual puzzle games to hardcore RPG games on the mobile now also feature seasonal subscriptions to boost their overall monetization. So why are regular or seasonal content updates so important? Every developer knows that a live game will constantly lose players over time due to regular attrition. We normalized season lengths of games in our sample cohort and plotted that season length against the peak concurrent users, which we use as a proxy for basically overall player engagement. From this chart, you can see that upon the season's release, there's a massive increase in concurrent users, all the way up to 12.45%. However, by the halfway point of the season, much of that boost actually fades away, and you're all the way down to just 1% above of the previous season's peak concurrent users at that time. This rate of decay slows down as the season winds to a close, but ultimately, most games will end each season with fewer peak concurrent users than the previous. This is why it's important for developers to be able to focus on delivering exciting content to their players season after season. Whether it's on mobile or HD, regular content updates are key to retaining users in any live game. With that in mind, it's clearly important to have those regular content updates, but content updates are expensive and development resources are limited. We took a poll amongst our multiplayer game developers on using cloud-based solutions like Unity's Multiplay and VBox for their multiplayer game needs. And overwhelming majority agreed that scalability was critical to a multiplayer game, but almost 40% of them didn't feel like they had the necessary skills or experience internally to operate those multiplayer games. 87% of developers really didn't have a strong interest in creating their own matchmaking systems, and 47% agreed that they want to extend their multiplayer operations with an external team of experts. And when it comes to voice chat, almost 70% of developers were interested in using a third-party voice service for their in-game voice chat. As our experts at VBox can attest to, voice chat is not something that is simple to spin up internally, especially at scale. You can't just slap it on and hope it'll work. There's a lot of intricacies that come with scaling a voice across a lot of players. So now, more than ever, it's important to consider where developers should be allocating their limited development resources. If the previous chart on seasonal player engagement was any indication, it's clear that a majority of the time should be spent creating new content to consistently engage your players, and let external cloud-based solutions handle the non-core parts of your game. So this will let you scale more quickly and more efficiently, and ultimately deliver more value to your players so that they can continue playing your game. So I want to end this presentation with a few of our predictions for 2021. I'm not going to read through all of them, but on a high level, I'm going to touch on each of these 3 points. So we think that the upcoming privacy changes on iOS will impact the mobile ecosystem. This is kind of a pretty obvious thing, both on user acquisition and on monetization. While this is not entirely a wild prediction, we think that mobile developers still have a lot that they haven't prepared for in this area. So make sure you check in your ad tracking rate prompts on iOS 14 to get any kind of early signals, and if you have some kind of mitigation strategy for when that rolls out across iOS. We also think that cross-platform games between mobile and HD devices is the future. We've seen some really strong runaway successes in games like Among Us and Genshin Impact that have the same exact gameplay experience across different device form factors like mobile and HD. This contributes heavily to a game's overall stickiness and accessibility, which is key for live titles. And lastly, we think that even after the pandemic is over and the world begins to turn again, the number of gamers will remain high. We think that some of these newly converted quote unquote pandemic gamers will form new habits and are really here to stay. So this is just part of our larger report on the gaming industry. To learn more, check on the link here or just scan the QR code with your phone's camera. It's been a real pleasure to get the opportunity to speak with you all today. And if you have any questions, I think we'll open up the floor now. You can always contact your Unity account manager or myself to learn more. Thanks for your time.
Hey, that was great. Really fascinating stuff. I mean, there's a couple of things in there. I like the way you're using HD game rather than what we used to, when we used to call it either AAA or console. It all gets messy. Although it's interesting because I think arguably a lot of phones are actually higher definition than most PCs, but that's another subject. It's always hard coming up with good terms for these things. I thought particularly this ad thing, the way that ad retention for games is higher, particularly in the early days. I think that's really fascinating. Particularly, I wanted to check with you on something on that. I presume that data includes all the hyper casual games, which inherently have high initial term retention, but lower longer term retention. Is that right?
Yeah, so when we take a look at our data, we will do basically, I guess, percentile bounding. So we'll, bound out the high outliers beyond the 90th percentile. But yes, that will include a lot of hyper casual and casual games that definitely do have worse longer term retention. But even in that case, in aggregate, that long term retention is better for games with ads than without. And that's because
I actually think it could be implying even more, because I think it's probably including a lot of hybrid games, which is probably going to get the benefit of when they're smartly designed, the solid kind of seasonal base, like the like season packs you were talking about near the end there, as well as the earlier retention boost from having ads. So I think it just reinforces again another reason why hybrid monetization is so effective. I mean, you don't have to agree with me on that one, but it's just my feeling on it.
I mean, I think it's entirely true. Like one of my favorite hybrid casual games is Archero, and they've used rewarded video ads in their game quite well. That keeps you kind of going back, and you still find value from watching them.
Yeah, I think there's something about Archero in particular, which is, I mean, Archero's got an issue in the mid game where it basically gets to the point where you kind of start to lose the value proposition because there's only so much value in each hero. There's no real value in having multiple heroes. I did a bit of analysis for a game called Art of War Legions, and it was interesting how they had a similar problem, slightly different, but they had some similar problems with longer term retention. They managed to get this hyper casual kind of start off, a little bit more depth in terms of the hybrid monetization. But again, I think there's a really big difference in terms of how you run seasonality, which takes me to that last sort of diagram you showed about seasonality. One of the things I found myself is that predictability of that seasonal update is the most important thing from my personal experience. Is there anything in the data that you've seen so far that would reinforce that or contradict that idea?
Yeah, so we actually saw that games that had their season length, let's say, be 9 weeks, we're still updating on that same exact 9-week cadence because, like you said, players are expecting certain things when that rolls back around. So nobody expects anything for your first 2 seasons, but after you've basically had 2 and established that cadence of like, hey, we're going to update this once a quarter, people are going to expect that update once a quarter, and they will regular just re-engage on their own, even without any prompting for you, because they'll be like, okay, well, this is around the time that this game has new updates and content. Let me go check back in if they've delivered on that. So that's definitely a part of it.
I mean, I think it very much depends on the game. I mean, my personal opinion is that once a quarter is too long. I think it needs to be monthly. And back in the early days of mobile, when it was first starting out in the Java days, I found very, very early on that the shorter the time frame, the more people came back more regularly. So I was updating content originally once a month, then once a week, then every day. And the average return rate was basically directly connected to the time frame that I updated. Now, it won't be the same for every game, don't get me wrong, but I think it just shows that running games as a service is all about understanding the cadence of your audience as much as it is anything else.
Yeah, we've really gone past that old-fashioned kind of box model of games, for better or for worse, where you just sell a game for $60 off the shelf and that's pretty much it. Everything is about live updates now. Even for single player experiences, you want to kind of engage people who've bought the game in the past to kind of re-up and take a look at it, or engage with their game in new ways. Even those kind of single player experiences can be replayed in ways that people will still enjoy.
No, I totally agree. And obviously, as somebody who wrote the book on games as a service, it's like I'm going to be very biased on that. But one of the things I try to tell people who've got these beautiful one-time play experiences that we still want them. There's still a market for them, but you've got to manage them as a portfolio or as part of a combination of experiences if you're going to sustain the audience, because you're still going to set up the expectation of what's coming, how frequently, and why people should continue to care. And it's very difficult to maintain that with one product. And having a kind of DLC promise like 9 months down the line, most people have stopped playing by then.
Yeah, I agree. And especially like if you take a look at games where the content comes from the developer themselves, it's that constant like uphill battle of making more content before your users basically get bored of your content that you have made and turned out. For multiplayer titles, people make content for each other. If I play against you and I play against somebody else, that's different content for me, so to say. But even in those cases, you still want to have new content to re-engage both sides of the player and the players they play against overall.
Absolutely, totally agree. Emory, that was fantastic. Really appreciate it. And please, everybody, check out that report. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. I need to go get it myself. So I've just snapped the screen, so I got the QR code. Obviously, guys, feel free to check it out. I think it's really great stuff. Thanks, everybody, for listening to that. Emory, brilliant stuff. Thank you. And again, thanks for sponsoring.